There. My name's Cozy Wittman, and I am with College Inside Track, and we're going to talk about 4 strategies for a smarter college search. If you're unfamiliar with College Inside Track, we've been helping families navigate the college search process for nearly 20 years. Our goal is the same for every family to make sure students find right fit schools. And we would define that as the right academic fit for the student, the right social fit for the student, because your kids are people on a college campus too, but also the right financial fit, meaning that the actual cost of attendance aligns with what your family game plan is for paying for college. One of the things that we find to be true is that when we give families really good information to make solid decisions by, it just naturally brings down that stress level that sometimes occurs around the college search process. All right, before we wrap today, you will understand the use of the FAFSA, how it gets used, and how it might impact both acceptance and cost. We'll talk about how the list of selective schools continues to grow. We'll also discuss grade inflation and its impact on both testing, acceptance, and cost. And then lastly, you'll understand the different ways that you can apply to a school, including whether or not you want early decision to be part of that process. I always think it's good, though, to start with a little state of the state, if you will. Today, if we look over the last 30 years, what we see is that our public flagship universities, these are the main colleges in the state, that our flagship schools have outpaced in cost both their public peers and their private peers. Private schools have actually only gone up about 415%. When you compare it to our flagship schools, that's a pittance, if you will. Our very own University of Minnesota has gone up 570%. Our neighbors right next door, University of Wisconsin, up 1,047%. The highest I've found so far, UConn, University of Connecticut, has actually increased their prices almost 1,400% in the last 30 years. I sit down and chat college with families. I do this every day of the week except Sunday. I probably meet 300 to 400 families a year. And one of the things I ask the student is, tell me some schools you're kind of sort of interested in. And I'm here to tell you that your kids are bubbling up schools of interest that fall in the categories of these first 4 or 5 schools. The thing I want to point out, though, are the bottom 3. These are the flagship schools of their states. And you can see that these are all over $30,000 a year. And that's what we see nationwide. The flagship schools really are somewhere in the 35 to 40,000. UC Berkeley, an outlier there at 51,000. But your very own University of Minnesota, the Golden Gophers, in 2026 will be charging $40,000 a year to attend their university. All right, let's take a quiz. This obviously play along at home kind of moment. What percentage of students do you think transfer at least one time? Is that number 6%? Is it 14%, 25, 38, or 42%? It turns out today that the national transfer rate sits at 38%. So 38% of kids go off to college, discover they've made a poor choice, and need to leave and go to another school. Of the 38% who do that once, almost half of those kids do it yet again. 46% of the kids that transferred one time transfer a second time, going on to a third school. Now, I bring this up because this actually increases the cost of the student's degree. So one of the easiest ways to keep the price of college down is by making sure your student finds a good choice the very first time, which means you have to dive deeper into academic, social, and financial fit than cool campus, love the sports teams, and I thought the dorms were really cool, right? Or my boyfriend, girlfriend is going there, or my best group of friends is going to that school. We want to keep the price of college down. When your student changes schools just once, going from one public institution to another public institution, it increases the cost of that degree by about $14,000. We haven't even included private schools in this mix yet. And when they go and do that twice, like that 46%, it increases the cost of the degree by $24,000. So I want to kick this off by talking about financial aid. I meet a lot of families, and they often kick off our conversation by saying something like, well, we're not going to qualify for any financial aid. And what they actually mean is that they're not going to qualify for need-based aid. But when colleges talk about financial aid, they're actually not just talking about need-based aid. They are also including their merit scholarship dollars. And guess what? Most of those schools are also looping in loans to this conversation. Now, I don't know about you guys. I do not think about loans as aid. You have to pay those back. These two, need and merit, are gifts. Loans are not a gift. You have to pay them back, right? So just know that the colleges are incorporating those on their college websites. When they say the average student gets about X amount of financial aid on our campus, you should know that that's a combination of need, merit, and loans. So if it's true that your family will not qualify for need, already the number they're showing you, irrelevant. So it's important to keep that in mind, because sometimes the numbers you see on a college campus as the averages, the average student on our campus pays X, it is being influenced by all three of those things and likely does not reflect what you will actually pay on that college campus. All right, we're going to start this off by talking about need-based aid. There are two forms that your family might bump into to see if you qualify for financial need. And I want to be clear here. Some of you may qualify for need-based aid from the federal government. I'm not going to cover that today because a whole bunch of families in the country do not. And so when I'm referring to need-based aid, I'm actually referring specifically to the aid you might get from colleges, which is different than what you would get from the federal government. So there are two forms that you may bump into as your students applying to schools. The first form is called the FAFSA form. Most people are at least familiar with the terminology. It actually stands, the letters FAFSA stand for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Some schools, and these tend to be more selective, both public and private though. So for instance, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Texas, University of Michigan use these forms, as do U Chicago, Rice, Stanford, Duke, all the highly selective schools use something called the CSS profile. These two forms kick out something called the Student Aid Index, or your SAI. The SAI goes off to the colleges, and that's what they're going to use to determine whether or not you qualify. So they will take their sticker price, they will subtract the Student Aid Index, and if there is a positive number left over, you have need. And then they will have a gifting philosophy that says we cover X percentage of need. So what is the formula of the FAFSA that helps determine that Student Aid Index? Well, there are two groups of people that have to include their information on a FAFSA form. The first are parents. When we look at the parent assessment, what we see is that your income is being assessed at 47%, way the heck up here, but your assets only being assessed at 5.64%. So your income is much more likely to kick you out of the need-based space, much more so than your assets. Now, if you have 529 plans, those are actually counted at the parent asset amount, that 5.64%. This is a good thing because this is much lower than the student, as you will see. And sometimes people complain that, oh, we did the right thing, we saved for college, now we're being penalized for it. I'm here to tell you, you are not being penalized for it. That 5.64% assessment is teeny tiny compared to the interest that college savings plan has made for you over the years that you've had the money in there. The other thing I will tell you is when people don't have savings for college, often that space has to get filled with loans, and the interest rate on loans will also far surpass this little teeny tiny 5.64%. So you are not being penalized for saving. Saving for college is a good thing. Students also have to include their information because, of course, it's their FAFSA form. This is not a family form, it is a student form. And so when we look at the student assessment rates, what we see is that their assets at 4 times higher assessment rate, they're up at 20%, and then their income up at 50. Good news, most of your students don't have enough of either of these to really impact the outcome of your FAFSA. If you have a third party, I've got grandparents here, but it doesn't have to be grandparents. It could be godparents. It could be an aunt, an uncle, anybody who wants to help your student pay for college. They can do so, and their information is never included in a FAFSA, and this includes any 529 plans that are not the parents. So if grandma and grandpa have a 529 plan and they're going to help students pay for college, that does not get reported on the FAFSA form. Now, I've got 4 tips for you today. This is the first one. You really can't manipulate a FAFSA, right? So even though I said on the previous slide, Grandma and Grandpa's 529 plans aren't going to get counted, that is not a good reason to suddenly shift all your 529 plans into a FAFSA. Because remember, while their information is not getting included at all, your 529 plan is only getting assessed at this tiny 5.64%. So don't worry too much about that. My first tip for you here under not being able to manipulate your FAFSA is one, you can't remove yourself as a parent. The status of independence, when you look at the very specific criteria that makes a student independent, it is intended for many other people, not typically an 18-year-old who's going off to college. Don't include qualified retirement accounts. So if you have a 401k, a 403b, a Roth IRA, a regular IRA, none of those get included in a FAFSA form. You also don't want to include your primary residence, your home. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a vacation home somewhere like a cabin, you do have to include that. You do not have to include your primary residence. If you have divorce as part of your family status, only one parent is going to fill out that FAFSA form. And the way you determine that today is based on who is financially supporting that student the most. So it's not based on who's claiming that student as a dependent on taxes. It's not based on custody. It is 100% based on who is financially supporting that student. Now, what they didn't do at the federal level is define support. So what I tell people is just be able to support in documentation whatever decision you decide to make. If you have multiple kids in college at the same time, this is not going to impact your need. So when you fill out student A's FAFSA form, your income is going to get assessed at 47%. And when you fill out student B's FAFSA form, your income is going to be assessed at 47%. So in essence, if you have 2 kids in college, the formula is going to assume that you're able to spend 94% of your income on college, which I just am imagining that's not the game plan, but it is the way the formula rolls. And if you think this is unfair, as many people do, write the people that represent you. Why? Because it could get changed. They did revise one of the 2024 changes that business owners thought was unfair. So the 2024 changes rolled out. Those rule changes said that farmers and business owners did need to include their assets. This past summer, in the big budget bill that passed, they revised it and said, nope, that's not fair. Farmers and small business owners with fewer than 100 employees do not need to include their assets or the value of their business. So again, if you want bullet 4 changed, just write the people that represent you and let them know that you don't think that this formula reflects the fair impact to families. When you're filling out your FAFSA form, don't include sibling 529 plans. So you only want to include the 529 plan for the student for whom you're filling out the FAFSA form. And then lastly, one of the things I do want to say is sometimes high net worth families think like, oh, that FAFSA is going to be a waste of my time. I'm not doing that. Here's what I want you to know. It is super common practice in the college industry to accept students at a higher rate where the financial aid forms have been filled out over the families who did not fill out a form. So I highly recommend you fill out your FAFSA form. The other thing that we know is true is that a lot of colleges around the country actually tie scholarship dollars to people who filled out those forms, right? So fill out your forms. You might be boosting your scholarship money, not your need-based money, right? Maybe you're not need-based, but you are boosting your merit scholarship dollars, and you're likely giving your student a leg up. One question I get asked frequently is, when am I supposed to be filling this thing out? October of your student's senior year is the very first time that you will fill out a FAFSA form. And then I recommend you just drop it on your calendar for the next 3 years. You're going to fill it out in the fall every single year until your student graduates from college. Again, the first time would be in October of your student's senior year of high school. All right, I want to transition over now and start talking about pricing and how colleges price their products. You may not find yourself to be need-based. Lots and lots of families don't. And if that's true, that doesn't mean necessarily you'd have to just shrug your shoulders and pay full price everywhere. So I want to help you understand how colleges price their product, and then how you can be a little bit more strategic in thinking about what you actually want to pay for a college education. The first thing we need to do is get you playing on the 2025 game board of Let's Go to College. When I meet with families, one of the things that I find is true is that most parents are trying to do college search like it's 1995. So they've got a 30-year-old notion of how the college landscape works. And I'm here to tell you, it does not work like that anymore. The world has changed pretty significantly in the scholarship space and the pricing of the product space, right? Just like phone plans don't work like they used to work back 30 years ago. This is also true for college pricing. So today, I want you to get rid of thoughts that still say, hey, if you leave the state, it's going to be more expensive. If you go to a private school, it's going to be more expensive, right? That's how I started my searches. I was like, stay in the state, go to a state school, because I just thought that was going to be less expensive for our family. We have 5 kids. I had real concerns. I was the mom up at 3 a.m. wondering how I was going to pay for college for 5 kids. So I'm going to use my bottom 3. They were very traditional college searches, the top 2 less so. The bottom 3 students. One of my kids went to our flagship school. I'm in Minnesota, so the University of Minnesota. One of my kids went to a private school in another state, and one of my kids went to an out-of-state public institution. Of those 3, the least expensive was the private school. It was $10,000 less a year than the University of Minnesota, followed by the out-of-state public institution, so the out-of-state state school. It was $8,000 less a year than the University of Minnesota. And the University of Minnesota was our most expensive option. So it's so important to get out of thinking about the world like we used to think about it. Now schools are either flexing their pricing or they're not flexing their pricing. And these are not good or bad. These just are. And you just have to understand where the school stands. How do they price their product? Are they going to flex it for you? Or when they show you the price, is that the price, right? So for instance, the University of Minnesota is not going to flex their price. $35,000 a year this year. Your student might get $1,000 over there. That's a lot of cash at the University of Minnesota, maybe 2, but you're not getting $10,000 out of them, right? So it's not going to go from 35 down to 25 or down to 20. It's going to go from 35 to maybe 33. So that's pretty inflexible. Now, if that meets your budget, that's a good thing. And maybe you don't care then that they are inflexible, and that's okay. Again, this is not good or bad, it just is. Can they meet your budget numbers or no? Also inflexible would be all of the selective schools, right? So University of Chicago, $93,000 a year, whatever they're charging, over 90,000 today. That is also inflexible. So if you are not need-based at that school, you will pay every penny of their 90,000 plus dollars. University of Michigan, $82,000 a year. If you're from Minnesota, you're going to pay every penny of $82,000 a year. So sometimes people assume that public schools are always cheaper. They're not always cheaper, right? So it's important to keep that in mind. There are also flexibly priced public institutions. I'll stick with Michigan. If your student's open to Western Michigan, those guys don't charge out-of-state pricing. Everybody goes for in-state pricing. Some of the mountain states auto-convert you into residents after a year. Those are all public institutions that are flexing their pricing. Schools like a St. Thomas, a St. Kate's, Gustavus, St. Olaf, Drake, Creighton, Quinnipiac, Puget Sound, there are all kinds of schools like this, show you one price, but if we went to those campuses and gathered up thousands of kids, we wouldn't find anybody paying that price. So it's important to understand if they are flexibly or inflexibly priced, and you can't use the old norms of in-state, out-of-state, public, and private. Today, colleges are your single largest source of scholarship dollars. I do not recommend going out on the internet and trying to find private scholarships that fit your student. That will be by and large a waste of your time. Local scholarships, totally fine. Go out and apply to all the local scholarships. So your school will usually have, your high school will have a list of all the local all the local sponsored scholarship dollars. 100% apply for those. Just don't go out on the internet looking at those scholarship aggregators. The average student has to apply to between 50 and 80 of those. And the average award amount, $1,900, right? Congrats, you bought books, but your student spent hours and hours and hours on the internet. So don't do that. Today, the way you control the price of college, but also acceptance, by the way, is based on the schools that make it to the list in the first place. So if you put a bunch of inflexibles who have price tags of $90,000 on your list, but you're hoping to pay $45,000, you're not going to meet your goals. There are not going to be scholarship dollars there for you. The key component to a well-honed college list is that it meets your students' academic and social goals, but also can get you to the prices that you're hoping to pay for a college education. And the school list is going to determine that. Secondary factors that certainly influence both acceptance and cost are the decisions your student makes in high school, and then how they tell their story big picture. So what I'm really talking about here is being a competitive applicant. What do I mean by that? I do not mean every kid's got to be a 4.0. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I do want you to think about is what schools will your students' GPA, no matter what it is, put them in the top third of the incoming freshman class for that college. Not only will looking for schools that put you in the top third increase your likelihood of acceptance, increase your scholarship dollars, it will also increase your students' likelihood of success by 40%. Students who are in the top third have a 40% higher likelihood of success than if they go to a college where they are in the bottom third of their freshman class. I don't know why you would choose one where your kid's in the bottom third, reducing their likelihood of graduation from that school by 40%, right? Choose schools where they're in the top third. Quality of activities over quantity. I don't need your student buried in activities to be interesting to colleges, and we're going to talk more about that here in a little bit. Be demographically interesting. This is so easy to do, and again, most of us cut ourselves off, right? I did the same thing, stay in the state, go to a state school, that was me. It turns out my kids and your kids, way more interesting out of our area than in our area, and this is true for everybody, right? St. Thomas in St. Paul does not need one more Minnesota applicant, they get plenty of those. But Quinnipiac would sure like them, right? Puget Sound would love to see them. So it's important to keep that in mind. This is a huge boost. Every school wants to say they've got one kid from all 50 states and 37 countries around the world. So if your students want to go far away, start checking it out. Don't automatically chop them down and say there's no way. Demonstrated interest is an interaction between your student and the school. Big universities don't track this as much as smaller universities. They are certainly tracking this at schools like Baylor, University of Dallas, Lewis and Clark. There are tons of schools where they are tracking this. And so interacting with the school is a big plus. Transcript rigor also matters. It matters because at the end of the day, the schools want to bring kids to their campus who are going to be successful. And one of the ways a student can demonstrate that success is by taking on a little bit of rigor while they're in high school. This does not mean they have to be buried in AP or PSEO style classes. They don't. But if they can just dip their toe in just a little bit, that's a good thing. Demonstrating collegiate level work while you're in high school helps the college feel better about bringing you on board. And by the way, this brings a lot more money to the table. And then lastly, how your student tells their story matters. The colleges do read essays. They are looking at the applications. It's an important part of this process. We spend a ton of time with our students on their essays and their applications. This is not just a check the box moment. All right, my second tip for you is understand early decision. I think that it is very confusing for families, the different application ways that you can apply. The biggest confusion is between early decision, ED, and early action, EA. These are very different things. So early decision, it's right in the title, it's a decision. It's a commitment to the college that says, I am coming. If you let me in, my answer is yes. And I will withdraw all my other applications. For that reason, I would love to see you use it strategically if you're going to use it. Make sure it's actually giving your student a boost to getting in. Some schools may only accept 10 or 11% of their freshman classes out of early decision pools. Wake Forest last year took 58%. So obviously at Wake Forest, that's a huge boost. At University of Virginia, it's 32%, huge boost. 10%, not so much. And I'm not sure it's worth it for what you're giving up. Using early decision does not mean that you can't apply to other schools. You can. You just can't apply to them early decision, but you could totally use early action. Early action says to the school, or early application, you'll see it both ways, says to the school, I love you so much, I got my act together and got all this stuff out the door, but I'm leaving my options open, right? It is not a committed application. Don't use early decision if you cannot afford full fare at the school. So when you look at their total cost of attendance, if you can't afford that, don't let your student apply early decision, because at the end of the day, once you've committed, you've in essence taken off the pressure of the school to worry about whether or not you're coming. And if you put all your eggs in that single basket, they have no reason to give you money. You've told them before you know your financial award that you're going to come. So there's no incentive for them to give you any scholarship dollars, right? So just make sure you can afford full fare. Now, if you can't afford full fare at that school and it gives you a boost up, early decision is a great tool to use. If you can't afford the school, then my suggestion is to use early action, or EA. All right, I like to give people an understanding of just how selective brand schools are getting. A lot of people think the highly selective schools are just the Ivies. The Ivies are simply 8 schools. The highly selective schools probably go to the top 50 or 75 even schools in the country. These are schools that have acceptance rates under 30%, and there are a ton of them, and every year there are more and more. And it's not because more people are applying, It's because the same kids are applying to more schools. If we look back a decade, the average student applied to between about 9 schools. Today, the average student is applying to 43 schools. 43 is a crazy number. Do not let your student apply to 43 schools. It does not help them get in. The way you get into highly selective schools is by having a high quality application, not by throwing a ton of pieces of spaghetti against the wall and hoping someone sticks. That is not how you get into those schools. So it's really important to keep that in mind. And I also want students to just really think about this, right? Do you want to put your energy and time into an application where you've only got a 6.5% likelihood of winning, right? And sometimes kids are like, yeah, okay. You know, you can read it behind their eyes. So you're telling me there's a chance. At the end of the day, I want kids to think about it this way. If you invited somebody to go to a dance with you and they said yes, and then they quantified that by saying, well, there's about a 6.5% chance that I'll go with you to this dance. I don't think you're going to the dance with that kid, right? That's really important. It's the exact same thing here. The other thing I want kids to know is that acceptance rate and rigor are not the same thing. These are two separate things. A school is not automatically more rigorous because they've got a low acceptance rate. All the low acceptance rate reflects is volume of applications. Because guess what happens? When a school gets more applications, as is happening right now, because so many of these schools remain test optional, and they're using the Common App. So 2 easy ways to get your application out. And if I'm not a great test taker, but I've got a crazy good GPA, maybe I've got a chance, right? So they apply to all these schools. The more applications they get, the lower their acceptance rate gets. The lower their acceptance rate gets, guess what happens? The more applications they get. Duke got 54,000 applications for 1,700 spots last year. Good news, though, there are a ton of schools where the acceptance rate is actually going up. And so take a look at this list. These are crazy good schools. These aren't the only ones, of course. George Washington, what a great school on the East Coast. For the East Coast kids, UConn, crazy good school, great women's basketball. DePaul in Chicago, crazy cool school. Marquette used to be pretty stingy with their scholarship dollars. They're all the way up to an 87% acceptance rate. And sometimes kids will go, like, well, I don't want to go there. They take everybody. Nope, they take a larger portion of the many fewer applications that they get because these aren't as big a brand, right? Michigan State has to compete with their sister organization, the University of Michigan. And guess what? They lose a whole bunch. And so consequently, their acceptance rate is going up. And you would be very challenged to convince me that the degree coming out of Michigan State is so much worse than the degree at University of Michigan. Both these schools leverage their alumni like crazy people. These are both great schools, except you'll find money at Michigan State and your student has a very good shot at getting in. Only 17% shot at University of Michigan, and you'll pay $82,000 for that privilege. I also want people to understand what average incoming GPAs look like at our flagship universities, right? This is not unique to the private selective schools. There is a Southern migration going on now, so lots of kids heading south to go to college. The big winner here, University of Tennessee. Auburn and Clemson have gotten so hard to get into that kids have stopped applying as much. They get a ton of applications. But a ton of those kids don't get in because they've got acceptance rates now, both those public institutions under 15%. And so consequently, the big winners, Ole Miss and University of Tennessee. Your kids listen to TikTok all the time, and this is who kids are talking about. And so guess what's happened? University of Tennessee's average incoming GPA has started to climb. Pre-COVID, it was at 3.46. They're all the way up to a 3.66 and climbing. So Because some schools are a little bit more challenging, I think it's important to understand that acceptance is actually more than grades and test scores. So they aren't blindly grabbing out of all the 4 point pluses, 36 on their ACT kids, right, at those schools. They're looking for students who have done something more than just be smart. There's so many smart kids in the US. And so your student needs to be thinking about, if you want to go to the big brand schools, what kind of passion projects. This could be community service, it could be research, it could be fundraising. There are all kinds of things they can do, but they have to be willing to step outside of the traditions and norms of a regular old high school student if they want to go to those schools where the acceptance rates are lower and their average incoming GPAs are higher. Now, lots of you are thinking, Cozy, I don't care about any of this because guess what? My kid isn't interested in those things. Well, guess what? They still need an activities list that matches who they are. I don't need kids to be well-rounded. That is myth. What I need them to be is them, and just have them go deeper. Those kind of extra booster projects are not just good for getting in, they actually boost scholarship dollars with schools that don't have as high, have as low acceptance rates. So when you start to get into the schools with 50, 60, 70% acceptance rates, those semi-boosted projects or semi-boosted applications bring on significantly more scholarship money. So they don't need to go crazy. They don't need to be doing cancer research. I do want them, though, to go deeper in the areas that they love. If you're building an orchestra, which is what college campuses are doing, they're trying to build a combination of people on their campus. I can't build an orchestra if everybody's a flute, right? So I don't need your kids to be well-rounded. Let them take the things they love and are passionate about and then just go deeper. Another quick quiz. In 2002, there were 134 perfect ACTs. How many were there in 2022? Was that number 306, 585, 1257, or 2542? Turns out the answer is 2,542. So my last tip for you, testing does still matter. Plan appropriately. Colleges do care about the tests, but they don't care which one. Not anymore. It's not regional. There isn't one of these is seen as more as a stronger test. Today, your student can choose between the ACT or the SAT. The colleges do not care which one they choose. Schools are accepting students with a score at higher rates than kids who do not submit. Now, don't worry if the tests are not your student's shiny moment, then we go back to activities, right? It's okay. But if your student is fine, I mean, too many students are like, oh, the schools don't care about tests anyway. Yes, they do. They very much care. So I want a student to get prep that fits them. They are competing against kids who have. And candidly, this investment in test prep will pay off because the test scores are also aligned with scholarship dollars. And then you can make decisions about setting the test score when you know for a fact you're all done. I don't recommend putting in the actual schools when you're registering for your tests. So one last thing, search for success, not brand. What do I mean by that? I mean, think about academic fit. All schools are not the same academic environment. Some have different teaching formats. So if your student's a better hands-on learner, seek out colleges or programs where hands-on is the learning style. 80% of kids change their major. Plan for that. Give them some elbow room. Let them change their mind about their degree without having to change their school, which means they've got to have some elbow room and you've got to dive in a little deeper to learn more about that teaching format. And then I always want students to know that college is sometimes the first time even really smart kids fall down and scrape their academic knees, right? So talking actively in the search process about things like tutoring and how common that is, small group study, how common that is, the writing center, what a great place to get feedback on your writing before you hand it in to your professor. Talk about all the services available to students. And if your student has an IEP or a 504 in college, then they have the opportunity to transition that into something called a college accommodations plan. So here is a little bit about us. College is an industry, it is changing all the time. And today it feels like it changes by the week. Somebody's got to keep track of that stuff. That's what we do, so we can free you up to not worry about it. We do help families navigate the entirety of the college search process. That 38% transfer rate drops to less than 4% when we work with families. We can ensure that you know the price of schools before they ever make it to the list and your student falls in love with that school. This is my favorite thing we do. I have 5 kids. I mentioned 4 are girls. They have all mastered the eyeball roll, and I never get to be the smartest person in the room. So we get to be that neutral third party. We can chat with your kids about things that they just simply won't listen to you about. All right, so here's the coolest thing I want to offer to do. I do free consultations. I mentioned that already. We sit down and I just answer your questions about your college search with your student. These are great tips. They don't fit everybody. So we would sit down for some one-on-one time with your student and with your family. We'll walk through academic fit, social fit, and financial fit. And I'll give you some strategies. I can help you understand your FAFSA outcomes so you'll know, are we going to be a need-based family or no? So use this QR code if you want to take advantage of that family consultation. I would love to meet your family. I think those are so fun. It's bar none my favorite part of my job. If you have a sophomore or junior, you can use the QR code to request that time. It'll take you out to a Google form. Get a copy of this deck if you want it. We're happy to send it to you. You can use the QR code for that. If you have your own group of people that you meet with on a regular basis who also have high school students and you're wishing all those parents had heard this, you can do that for them. I'm happy to do that. My presentations are free. I'm always happy to share. And then do follow us on Facebook. We put a ton of free content out there. Use the QR code to take advantage of any of that. On behalf of the team at Norex and myself, thank you for listening to the video, and I hope to get to meet you sometime very, very soon. Take care.